Well, here it is at last. My RCA SHC-4. Actually, this is not an SHC-4, it's an SHC-2. But the -2, 3, and 4 are essentially the same product with slightly different cabinet features. I'm going to open her up, and you will notice that I've already removed everything from the cabinet. I've taken the chassis out. I have removed the turntable from its place. I've taken the speaker board and the grill cloth out. I've even taken the stereo mono switch out. I'll explain more about that later. But I've taken everything out because I'm going to restore it. And I'll see you on the next segment of the video. By the way, just wanted to add one note for any who might want to be taking one of these apart. These pieces of wood that go across here where the speaker enclosure, it was my idea that I could just loosen the whole speaker board from the back and take out the speakers and the board and the grill cloth as one unit. However, that turned out not to be the case. The speaker board is affixed to those two cross pieces in such a way that you must remove the speakers first. If you try to force the speaker board out without doing that, you will no doubt break one of those cross pieces, which I'm sure is something that we don't want to do. Okay, here's the electronics chassis from the SHC-2 that I'm taking apart for restoration and putting into operation condition. This is the RC1168C chassis. Let's just look at some of the things on the back of the chassis. This is the auxiliary AC output for powering some other device. It can power, it says 200 watts maximum. I suspect that's for powering an RCA tape player, which they refer to several times in the documentation. This Molex connector is for the AC power to the record changer. This is the balance pot, which changes the relative gain of the two channels to balance the level of the internal and external speakers when operating in the stereo mode. Or I suppose it would do the same thing if you're operating in the mono mode. The socket here is for the stereo mono switch. That switch is located just above the tuning dial in the cabinet. This jack is for the external speakers, which I guess you can see, it's plainly labeled. I don't have the external speakers, but I think I can substitute something. This slide switch right here selects between having internal and external speakers. That means if you have both speakers, you can have that switch over here. But if you just want to use the internal speakers only, the switch is in that position. So this switch and this switch, by the way, this switch is nothing more than just a single pole, single throw switch. Later in another video, maybe we'll look at the schematic and just see how that happens. It's really pretty clever how they do it, how they just by having one switch change from mono to stereo. This is the audio output transformer for the second audio channel. This jack right here, this RCA 1/4 inch jack, phone jack, is for the internal speakers. In other words, if you have another device for which you do not have speakers, you have access to the internal speakers just by plugging it into this jack. I may modify this so that the internal speakers plug into this jack rather than being hardwired to this terminal strip like they are here. This three-prong jack here is for the phono, the output of the phono cartridge. And here we have this one, which is labeled tape. So this is probably for a tape player, something that was available at that time. Of course, this is the audio output transformer for the other channel. These wires right here, they go to various pilot lights that are located around the chassis. There's there's one here and by the tuning dial, and there's one over here on the other side of the tuning dial. There is one that goes directly below the chassis that lights up the knobs. One of these bulbs is for lighting up the record changer compartment, and the other is for the pilot light at the bottom of the cabinet, so you can tell that the unit is on if the doors are closed. Okay, so let's go to the bottom of the chassis. So here's the bottom of the chassis. As you can see, all of the paper capacitors are still there. So this has never been restored before. So there are a number of paper capacitors, quite a large number, but it'll just take a little time for them to be replaced. I'm going to try to zoom in here let that refocus. Come on. Come on. I'll back out. What I'm trying to show you is that there's a number of capacitors in this little grouping right here. And they're really buried down in there, so it's going to be a little challenge to replace those. I see that orange electrolytic and some other various types of paper capacitors. So this is going to be a fun job. I toyed with the idea of turning it on without replacing the capacitors, but I really just can't take the chance. I've checked a couple of the capacitors with a capacitor tester, and they test good, so even the electrolytics. But still, I'm not going to take the chance. Okay, let's go to something else. Just one more thing I wanted to show you. You look right down in here. The camera can stay in focus at this short distance. You see how that resistor lead is passing over that orange wire, and you notice that in the past the orange wire, the resistor lead has been hot and it's kind of melted into the insulation of the orange wire. But now the orange wire is in a slightly different location, but the resistor lead is melted into it again. Now I've checked it with my meter. It is not shorted, but this is just the kind of thing you have to look out for, because in time that could eventually develop into a short. So it's just fortunate that I noticed it. It'll have to be one of the first things that I rectify. Just get that resistor lead off of that orange wire and maybe protect that a little bit more. See you next time.